Welcome to Musical Minds and Missions, M Cubed. I'm your host, Sarah Cahill. M Cubed is brought to you by Phenotypic Recordings, a media company that brings to light new music by world-class musicians and innovative composers, with a focus on music that highlights the most important issues facing the world in our time. Today, I'm talking with pianist Stephen Prutsman and Steve Copes from the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra. We're going to be talking about your new album, Prokofiev Reimagined, with the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra. And maybe we could begin by talking about how this collaboration came to be.
Wow. Well, I think that I think it was actually Cope's idea. As probably the greatest chamber orchestras of all time, the St. Paul has often performed kind of the stalwart romantic classical violin and cello concerti in its entirety many times. And there was also this bend of that orchestra. And Steve, I think, to explore new frontiers and find either through new commissions or, as in this case, is how can we reimagine composers' music that was written for a specific ensemble and then kind of just orchestrate it, take it to another level and be really fair to the original. Steve, do you remember when us talking about that at how it came about?
I mean, it sounds about right. I think you had already done a few. Well, first of all, history-wise, I don't know if the listeners know that, and I don't remember exactly what year, but it was in the early 2000s or maybe 2006, 2007, where the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, we did away with the music director format and went to an artistic partner model. And Steve had done one or two things with us before this time. And the idea was brought up to have him be one of the first 5 or so artistic partners that we had, kind of leaders, people that inspire the orchestra and also performs as a pianist, as a composer. And so Steve was one of this group of people, along with Josh Bell and I believe it was Nick McGeegan and some other people. So, and then several years later, I believe you did the Ellington things and maybe something else before that.
Yeah. No, there was a couple of arranging projects for the orchestra. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
There's a
Maybe
piece by Duke
started.
and that I Steve is a wonderful jazz pianist as well as classical, and our orchestra doesn't really get to do a lot of kind of popular things. It's just we're not big enough, and so there's a tune by Ellington called the Bluebird of Delhi, which is on his Far East Suite album, which I used to listen to all the time. And I was like, this would be a fantastic piece for our orchestra if we could just have someone like Steve arrange it. And it has a great solo clarinet feature in it, and we have a wonderful clarinetist and Steve did a great arrangement.
Yeah.
So I think in doing that and just also trying to expand the only Prokofiev symphony, for instance, we get to do is the classical symphony. Our instrumentation is not big enough. And then, maybe Peter and the Wolf and a couple other things. And I've always loved this first violin sonata, and I've always thought it has other colors in it. And so we talked about it, and and Steve did this amazing arrangement of the piece and of piano sonatas.
Yeah, it kind of evolved. It took time kind of coming together, and it was a big risk, obviously, for a major orchestra like that, just not really knowing what it's going to sound like. Well, every commission is kind of a risk, but this one we had high hopes for, and it's amazing to me that since the SPCO has the ability to say yes or no if they want to work with a conductor, a leader, in something very unfamiliar like this, a premiere, rendering of a new piece, and something
conductor
with no conductor. Yeah,
which is
which is challenging, but the fact that they were so successful at it is a real testament to their musicianship. And I'll dare say it. I think a chamber music experience without conductor is much more direct to me as a listener than having that intermediary. And certainly that, that has worked on many occasions with Beethoven symphonies and all sorts of stuff they do unconducted.
Oh, that's a really interesting point, though. That's an interesting point. I want to talk about your choices of two really fabulous Prokofiev works. And the Seventh Sonata is an interesting choice. And I just have to tell you a personal story for a moment. So I was visiting the composer pianist Carrie Riley, and with that lived in the Sierra Foothills, and we got really high together. And somehow we started listening to some version of the last movement of Prokofiev's Seventh Sonata, and we just went down this rabbit hole and started listening to, like, one of us would say, Marta Argerich, and then we'd listen to that. Like, the other one would say Horowitz, and we'd listen to that. Emil Galels and Richter, and it was like we spent hours just listening to pianists play the last movement of this. It's not a which we all know really well. And it made clear to me, I think this experience, which was just incredible, but it made clear to me how iconic this piece is and how it's kind of a pinnacle for pianists. And so it's an interesting choice because it's the best known of all the Prokofiev piano sonatas.
Mm-hmm.
And this sonata, which is so sort of, and now I'm doing air quotes, pianistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you choose this sonata to orchestra, to put into other instruments is really amazing. And in listening to your arrangement and how you begin with woodwinds, and in this last movement you have it with, I mean, it's very relaxed, and it's a way we're not used to hearing this sonata. So I wondered if you talk about that, just your choices you made.
Well, first of all, I think I can't find a more nobler endeavor when high than to listen to different renderings of Prokofiev's Seventh Piano Sonata, and so that, and I bet it provide a lot of insight. The music playing, so it's interesting with Prokofiev, with a lot of Russian music, Sarah. It's almost, because listening to the orchestrations of Peter and the Wolf, let's say, or the piano Prokofiev 3, the big piano concerto, or all of these these great pieces, how it's orchestrated. One begins, or at least with me, to associate certain register and characters of a particular timbre of an instrument, so that something in the like the opening da 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 dun 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 dun, it's in a perfect register for the bassoon and oboe right there, and it's the articulation is marked detached, it's only marked forte. In all of these different things, it becomes kind of apparent, at least for me, as to what choices are to be made. And a lot of it, there's sometimes where you have to really get creative about how to orchestrate a particular bit. Now, no note from the original was harmed in any way. That the all the pitches are there in the right places with articulation. We went to great lengths to ensure that we were accurate in pitch, dynamic articulation, all of those kinds of things. As the piece kind of had now evolved for chamber orchestra. But the choices of instrumentation are definitely the biggest part of this, and how to include everybody, how to make reasonable demands on certain instruments. For if there's kind of awkward leaps in the piano part, you may not want to have one wind player try to do that, and
Well, one big
Or-
thing we had to go through towards the beginning with the piano sonata was Steve sent me a draft of especially the last movement, and I said, "There's no way." Yeah,
Oh, I had to
believe it.
rebar it. Yeah, that's
Well, yeah,
right.
you had to, because it's written in 7/8 time for your nerdy classical music listeners, 7/8 time, and I said, especially when you're dividing the offbeats and all the parts of the piano into different parts of the orchestra, it's going to be much. You have to write it in a way that everyone can, have a chance at feeling the rhythm and seeing,
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
visual.
it's really
feel.
it's
So we got.
it's a giant, like, crossword, where it's
Mhm.
more than that, a jigsaw puzzle, because the way he wrote that opening was, in seven, it's subdivided 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, and the ear says bum bum. The stress on 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, kind of naturally correlates with the way you hear it. But Prokofiev, for some reason, has the stress being on 2 and 4, bumpy, so it's like, instead of 4 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, it's 4 1 2 1 2 1 2, something like that, and that was just not feasible, particularly at these tempi. So I had to rebar it a couple of places, basically try to get it so that 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 could be part of everybody's inner mechanism from the get-go, particularly since there's no conductor.
Yeah.
Nobody beating time.
But, we're used to hearing that last movement in the original version for solo piano of kind of percussively. Like, people play it, they kind of attack it at the beginning, and in your arrangement, it's very relaxed. It's kind of jazzy. It swings. It's very it has a casual feeling, and it's
Right. I think
different. Yeah.
with pianists, I think, first off, there is that Soviet / Russian, tradition that has still carried over, and that is whoever can make the loudest, most aggressive sound wins, and that's what you see. And I would dare say that for a lot of this big this Prokofiev, Shostakovich, it's okay to do. The difference is that, though, that I think what it comes down to is two things. One is attack, and for example, if you have a string orchestra playing beep 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 beep, they inevitably, because it's ensemble, there's a little bit of a lip at the very beginning of a particular note attack, right? It's
Hmm.
it's almost impossible to get, every string player to play exactly at the same piece with the same level of intensity, same attack. And that's the beauty of strings, So that may be part of it. I think also, just though, the mentality, without sounding, like I'm over the top here, but I do, one great tradition, simple terms that SPCO has tried to adhere to, is make it beautiful. Whenever possible, make it beautiful, and in this, and then as well, finally, that I can equally hear it as a very percussive, driving, frantic, insane piece, and then having these kind of dance elements you're talking about, and the jazz influence as well. So, what do you think,
But
Steve?
well, I mean, I was just going to say, as someone who I was not, I did not know this piece as well as the two of you. I'm sure that I had heard it at some point, but definitely, just didn't know it in that way. It sounded very familiar, all the language of Prokofiev, but as soon as the project started, as soon as I got a draft, and I started to do what you were doing when you were getting stoned, without getting stoned. But so I listened to all these different pianists, and Steve pointed me in a certain direction, especially to this wonderful Sokolov, the just kind of a cult figure, and he himself has two very different recordings. One is like a live recording, and one is a recording, and they sound like the same pianist, but he came to very different realizations. And one of them is, you know, quite, I wouldn't say it's relaxed, but it's not, as fast as possible, like Martha Argerich, which is also a fabulous, she's amazing. Is also a fabulous recording. So, it just goes to show you that the metronome markings they put, there's no one way of doing anything like that. And that's why I think it gives more leeway for us as a group, and for Steve as a arranger to just do something a little bit different. It's still, I would take a little issue that that we were relaxed at the beginning of that movement.
Oh,
but
yeah.
but it's just a different feel. Right. But I mean, the difference between his two recordings is, he must be playing 20, 30 clicks under Martha Argerich. That's the recording she had. And then you hear more of it. And I think doing what we were learning the piece that way as an orchestra, you have to, it can be fast and driving, but you have to be able to hear across the stage and hear each other. It's not just one person controlling all the gears. So
Yeah.
and for the violin sonata, I think actually even before I started to talk to Steve about it, I started to make notations in my score for something I wanted to do, but never had the talent or the time or the will or whatever. And I remember making notes like flute or clarinet or this or that, and so I think when we first started talking, I had some idea of some of these colors, but
And
I
yeah,
still
then the same with me. That and Sarah, have you played that? You must have played that piece before, the F minor
Yeah.
sonata.
I grew up with the Oyster recording.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But if I rehearsing with I recorded this with a old friend Evgeny Bushkov a long time ago, and remember working with him. All the storytelling he would come up with in that piece, like, "Ooh, this is the Russian forest that stimulate me very, very dark, and then you hear the chimes off in the distance where everyone lays dead." That kind of that, and it would invoke all sorts of imaginative stuff and use the word chimes. So of course there's a really appropriate place for chimes in that piece. The that was a big part of the fun, I have to say, is having kind of free use of everything that incredible percussionist at the SPCO can do. It's scored just for one percussionist, so he is jumping all over the place and to try to get these specific hit points. You can imagine if you're going at a cymbal roll and then you've got to jump and get the mallet to hit a bass drum on a downbeat, how crazy it must be. But he is also a fantastic mallet player, and was trying to think of, I remember talking to Copes about this, what kind of instrumentation for that opening of the slow movement of the F minor sonata, because that's a real pianistic thing with soft pedal down and the damper pedal down, and you played these beautiful triplety F major 7 harmonies that keep going, and to my knowledge, no instrument in a chamber orchestra has kind of damper pedals, except maybe a vibraphone, or chimes do as well. So then the idea of this very kind of dated sounding instrument, the vibraphone, to play that opening with full pedal down and maybe a little bit of a shadow of string sustained notes, very, very soft underneath, so that we can clearly hear the harmony, as a pianist would try to get out there without, of course, overshadowing the solo instrument. And I hope we can hear a little bit of that.
Let's listen to it. This is the slow movement of the violin sonata. number 1 by Prokofiev. Wow, that's beautiful.
So each of those movements I think posed its very individual difficulty, not the least of which is it's insanely difficult for the violinist, the soloist. So, this is the piano sonata, of course, is for full chamber orchestra. In this case, we kept the violin part of the piano sonata for violin and piano of the Prokofiev. Only the piano part was orchestrated. So it becomes something akin to a chamber concerto in that you do have a soloist. But there these two elements, soloist versus the orchestra in this case, or soloist versus piano. That's the equation here. And another kind of consideration as well that people often talk about is balancing for live performances, because if it's a piano concerto, it's less of a concern if for a composer, but for violin or for string instrument, it is something that to be aware of, that how can you orchestrate something so that the soloist sings through, but everyone else is engaged. And the last movement, as you know, has this is another dance, very folksy in nature. And then almost cinematically, it morphs into the chaos and catastrophe and despair of the opening movement's kind of premise. And the chimes reappear at the very end. And with those haunting scales, Steve, how hard are those scales?
They're hard.
Prokofiev wrote that they're supposed to sound like the wind going through the graveyard. And so, again, one of the great things about music I love is we get these kind of big concepts, these intersections with who knows what out in the cosmos. And at that point, we're never able to fully realize what we hear in our inner theater, our head. It's too great. It's too beautiful. It's too mystical. And we always come short. And I think of that spot for, a similar spot for the piano where, in Ravel's music, that I'll never play it as beautifully as I imagined it. So.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say controversy, but especially in our orchestra, when we talk, we do try to expand. We have to kind of expand the repertoire we play because we have certain limits with our size, budget, and stuff. And there's debate within the orchestra about like what kinds of things do you really transcribe? Is it really worthwhile? Do you Bernstein and Seiji Ozawa and many other conductors done the Beethoven quartets for full strings. I personally really don't like that, but I think it can work with certain movements and, slow movement of Opus 135 or certain things can work, but it, it, it should, whatever you do should be making a case that it's at least equal or if not better, or highlighting something about the piece that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I think Steve's arrangements do that for these pieces, especially because you're going from small to big. You have all the colors of the piano that you can kind of kaleidoscope out and make more. Whereas because of the repertoire that we're not able to play in our chamber orchestra, like Mahler, there are reductions of especially like the Fourth Symphony that are, I think, are fantastic to play for us because we get to play that music. But
it's a tricky slope, I think.
It's a tricky slope. But there's a wonderful Ravel. I don't know what Steve feels about this, or if he even knows it. There's a conductor, Jan Pascal Tortelier, the son of the cellist Paul Tortelier, did a arrangement for big orchestra of Ravel piano trio, and I think it's great. It sounds like one of Ravel's big.
I'd like to hear that. Yeah,
but
I think
we totally different. It's a totally different.
It has to be accepted as a different experience. I think it's also it's for a lot of people, a lot of lovers of these great pieces, you develop a specific relationship that does involve the instrumentation. So that, for example, Goldberg Variations on String Trio. I remember that controversy ages ago. And I came to, the music is so sublime. It exists if it could be played on sousaphone and it would still be amazing, if it was good sousaphone quartet.
Next week, actually, on our program next week, we're doing an arrangement of two pieces from Art of the Fugue by George Benjamin, and it's for 3 violins, 3 violas, a cello, 2 horns, and a flute. And the flute only plays in the second one, and it's just magical,
I want to hear that.
Especially the second one where he uses different combinations of instruments to make it sound like an organ.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, Sarah and Steve. I've listened to this recording of Glenn Gould playing Goldberg Variations for 30 years, and now someone wants to take it away from me. It's not. I can understand that inclination, but
maybe you can add in the singing to your arrangement. Just have one person in the orchestra that does the singing.
Well,
but Steve, what is the experience like for you as a violinist with the violin sonata playing with a pianist versus playing with the Saint Paul Chamber Orchestra as a concerto?
Well, there's the part, like Steve said, the part is exactly the same. So, but also the recording process is different from the concert process too. So that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But so the way you have to project and interact with the orchestra is very different from how you do it with a pianist. You have to. Plus, there's no conductor, so it's my responsibility to make sure that the orchestra part is together, and it's complicated. And so, you can imagine all the things that you have to think about going into a week like this. But we have such a great group of people who are just like, most of whom, especially non-violinists, maybe don't know this piece as well. And even violinists don't know it as well as the orchestration kind of demands. And then, so, we left time to work on it. And I think by the end, it, felt very comfortable that there's still certain things, that just like, I noticed in listening back to the recording, if you were playing with a pianist, you would have a much more instantaneous reaction. And just like playing, but a piece that is written as a concerto is usually written to be played with that kind of level of give. And with this, you have to kind of like figure out where that lies. Like you're going to try to play it exactly like you're playing with a piano, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Because the orchestra doesn't bond in the same way. You're not as close. People can't hear in that exactly that way. But I think we came quite close.
I don't think it's possible unless you're, a kick-ass concert leader, and Steve leads the SPCO and he goes to Europe, and the creme de la creme of this particular size ensemble needs a very specialized leader sitting in that spot, that concertmaster spot, and that I think you can name on one hand how who those people are, but then to lead and then also play a concerto at the same time, that's kind of special. With no conductor again. So,
But I mean, I think it's a challenge. It's still a challenge. But I've done Brahms concerto that way. I've done Hartmann concerto funèbre that way, and so have my colleagues. We did a reduction of Elgar cello concerto recently with our principal cellist, and just did a reduction of Saint-Saëns violin concerto too. So actually much trickier than symphonies to do some of this kind of stuff, because it involves that give and take in rubato of a soloist. But yeah, we have a special group that is, I don't know if you call it, we're glutton for punishment, or it's a different thing. And fortunately it's not every week we do this, because I think that would just be a little bit too much. But sometimes it's very intense, and yeah, like next week we're doing a piece that none of us have, I don't think, really done, by Michael Tippett. Will be challenging, just put together. So I think we look forward to the challenge, and especially with composer like Prokofiev to add to our repertoire, and Steve's arrangements. So
I think, also, Sarah, I would love to see this kind of these types of exploration continue with the phenotypic recordings. I've done one of my favorite projects was to do a solo piano transcription of a great epic prog rock work entitled Supper's Ready from Genesis. That was the old Peter Gabriel Genesis, one of the great compositions of 20th century. But to scale, to transcribe that for solo piano was a joy, and it ends up, kind of living its own life, very small life, but even for folks who appreciate it as a piano piece, because hopefully they listen to the original. But this is we haven't fully explored all of this, and it's a worthwhile endeavor. And I think also it kind of, in the case of crossing genre, it's a real treat for people like in Saint Paul to hear Duke Ellington on the concert stage, faithful to the original, but just, orchestrated for a different ensemble that loves it so much that they swing with it. That's something wonderful, that we've experienced, that our faithful audience members for chamber performances really appreciate, and they have a good time with. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's such a mysterious process. I mean, how you get from A to B, how you listen to a piece like the Seventh Sonata by Prokofiev and then hear instruments and how you translate. It's like it seems to be like literary translation, that
A little bit. Yeah. That's
one
an
language
interesting metaphor.
translated into a different language. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Anyway, yeah. There are in certain cases, and I can't find a great truth or theorem that kind of is applicable everywhere, but that there are pieces that just don't lend themselves towards, in my opinion, for whatever reason, that towards either a blow up with more instruments or a scale down. So
what pieces don't lend themselves?
well, for example, a Mahler symphony on solo piano, not going to go there. That does not really work for me. For the scale,
but back in way before Mahler, they, you know,
That was
they're
true. Yeah, absolutely.
all Beethoven
Okay, a Brahms
symphonies
symphony
because,
for solo piano. You know,
but
absolutely.
just for convenience because, and to play in the home, that was
Exactly.
was
Well,
string quartet.
forehand versions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. They hot off the press is the Brahms Fourth Symphony for four hands, and
Mhm.
so they would
And
dive in to get to know it. Um,
right, smaller symphonies too. Yeah.
right, but does it sound? Is it on par with the original? Not quite.
Mhm.
Other cases like the list transcriptions of the Beethoven symphonies. Oh, I'd pay money to hear those. That's kind of fun, I don't. It's not the same thing, obviously, but
There's other things that are just, you want to experience just because you want to, and who cares what everyone thinks about what it sounds like. I mean, one of our artistic partners now, Tebea Zimmerman, wonderful violist, she was all excited about a sextet that she was playing. It was a sextet version of Pastoral Symphony by Beethoven, and which, you know, as someone who actually we don't play it that much, but who has played it several times, I kind of was like, it still would be probably fun to play, but she who doesn't, Tabby who doesn't regularly play in an orchestra. I mean, for her and our colleagues, that's like must be a really wonderful experience, and why not? I mean, why not? We did the Kreutzer Sonata for solo violin and strings. It's an arrangement someone did, and there's another arrangement of the Kreutzer Sonata for cello quintet, which is
whoa.
very difficult. The cellists are doing all the piano figuration, and
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm working on a 12 cello arrangement of AC/DC Thunderstruck, by the way. So
yeah, well,
12.
enjoy your. I'm sure you can find some stuff in San Francisco to go along with that process.
Great.
Um,
It's a great project. Yeah.
Should we say?
Oh, I was just gonna say that I think I knew that this Prokofiev experiment would be possible because of we had already done some Rudolf Barshai had done these arrangements of some of the Shostakovich quartets that are very successful and really quite well done, and the third and the fourth quartet especially, and we'd done them several times, the third especially, and just brings a totally different dimension to like in a bigger scope that I mean, I actually listened to those pieces before I knew the quartets. And so that's the idea I had in my head before I heard the quartets, which is strange. But I mean, Shostakovich and Bach, Prokofiev, I think they're composers that lend themselves well to hearing in different ways for whatever. I don't quite understand why. Mozart, Beethoven wouldn't work quite as well.
Let's end with the last movement of the Prokofiev Seventh Sonata, which we talked about before, but now we can hear it and end this podcast with a little excerpt from that movement. And thank you so much, Stephen Prutsman and Steve Copes, for joining me today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to M Cubed from Phenotypic Recordings, co-founded by Michael Hostetler and Stephen Prutsman. The music you heard on today's show is available on Bandcamp and wherever music is streamed. There are links in the show notes. Today's program was produced by AJ Machado, and I'm your host, Sarah Cahill. Please follow or subscribe so you know whenever we post a new show. You can reach us at info@phenotypicrecordings.com, and we're always glad to hear from you.